You're listening to Voice Ed Radio. Your voice is right here. And welcome to another edition of In Conversation with me, Stephen Hurley, on Voice Ed Radio. And today I am thrilled to be welcoming back to the Voice Ed Radio airwaves Mr. Harvey Bischof, a longtime Ontario educator, current president of the Ontario Secondary School Teachers Federation, representing nearly 70,000 secondary school teachers, but also education workers at all levels of Ontario's education system. Harvey, welcome back to Voice Ed Radio.
Thanks, Stephen. Glad to be here.
Well, Harvey, we appreciate you spending time with us this morning. It's a busy week. Your membership and other teacher organizations and associations across the province are gearing up for a visit to Queen's Park on Saturday morning. But in just a couple of hours, students from across the province, many of them will be walking out in protest of the recent moves by this province's government. To say that Ontario's education space is energized would be kind of an understatement, wouldn't it?
A lot of focus on education issues at the moment, certainly, yeah.
So as Ontarians, we have been plunged into a set of conversations about education that we haven't had to have in some time. Many of our listeners indeed will remember 1997, the government of Mike Harris, and some of the upheaval and the turmoil caused in the education sector at that time. And Harvey, I'm wondering, are these conversations the same, similar, or is there a difference to the discussions that are being had now in Ontario?
Yes and no is my initial answer, but I'll explain that a little bit because it's not helpful quite like that. So, yes, to the extent that we're seeing a government that doesn't understand that education is an investment and not a mere cost. So in both cases, going back to 1997 and now, you have a government that's looking to cut a significant portion of the education budget out without understanding that what that will result in fewer students graduating, fewer students being successful, ultimately will have an impact on Ontario's prosperity and civic life. So to that extent, it feels very much the same, that you have a government that claims it's going to improve education by attacking educators, which, has never, ever proved to be a successful formula, and I don't know why it's being pursued again. It's different to this extent. The Harris government had laid out a very clear agenda. People understood where it was that they were trying to get, and whether or not we agreed with it, we knew where they were going. This government is reeling from pillar to post and doesn't seem to have any clear target that it's aiming for other than some sort of fiscal target. So the decision to massively increase secondary class sizes appears to have been made perhaps the day before the announcement. And we have lots of evidence to support that based on the ministry's inability to answer our questions about the meaning of it. And these are competent people when it comes to statistical analysis and forecasting and so forth. Mm-hmm. They couldn't tell us what the minister's announcement meant. It took them weeks, in fact, to come out with any clarity on the announcement whatsoever. So it appears a last-minute decision, and it's no way to make education policy if you want to have an effective education system. And so the difference, I would say, is very similar in outcome. Certainly a difference in the competency with which they're undertaking these, I would characterize as destructive moves.
Harvey, you used the phrase an attack on teachers. Is that how you are translating the cuts in class size or the proposed cuts in class size? Is this an attack on teachers?
It's an attack on the system. Mm-hmm. They're talking about 4 years from now having 1/4 fewer teachers in high schools across the province. And they're talking about, therefore, having 1/4 fewer classes that those teachers offer. When you look at a system right now that educates a huge range of kids with different kinds of needs and approaches, and offers the core curriculum, but all sorts of electives that are avenues to different kinds of futures that kids want to pursue. Those things are going to be drastically affected. A quarter of the classes will be cut out of Ontario's education system. How many art, music, technology, more specialized, higher level, let's say physics classes, are going to survive that kind of a slashing?
Harvey, on the one hand, some of these issues that we're dealing with today seem familiar. Class size is familiar to many. We hear of cuts to education. That's very, very familiar. I'm wondering, though, is there something else that this government is going after? And I'm thinking back to a report that I read from the Ministry of Finance back in September that specifically talked about building in more competition within the sector. And as opposed to nurturing private-public partnerships within the education sector and elsewhere, there was a suggestion that putting the funding in the hands of the end users might be a good thing. Are we heading for U.S.-style charter schools and voucher programs? Or is this a little bit of fear-mongering, as some would suggest?
Well, look, it's not fair to characterize that as fear-mongering when the government's own commissioned report, that was the Ernst & Young report that they commissioned shortly after they were elected,
yes,
which looked at so-called efficiencies, pointed directly to the notion of putting money into the hands of so-called consumers so that they could pursue. It was characterized as a form of market discipline, I think, in the Ernst & Young report.
Yes.
So does that point us towards some notion of school privatization, charters, vouchers, tax credits? Certainly there is reason to be concerned about that. It raised alarms for us. I would not call it fear-mongering, but I would say that we've raised the alarm. And in fact, we went, a number of us from my office here, went and met with the American Federation of Teachers for a couple of days in December to say, they gave us 2 days of highly sophisticated, truly excellent professional development on how to resist charters, vouchers, and other forms of privatization because of the damage that they've done to the American school system in so many ways. So that's a concern for us. But I think secondarily, it's really important to say that we don't really need to wait for the other shoe to drop in order to be alarmed by what this government is doing.
Right.
The decrease, cutting out a quarter of Ontario's teachers and a quarter of the classes that they offer, and requiring 4 mandatory e-learning courses. We can get into that at some point if you wish. Those things are catastrophic in themselves. It doesn't require the next step to privatization in order for this to be a catastrophe. We're there.
So, Harvey, you mentioned the requirement that high school students are going to have to take e-learning courses and be required, in fact, to take 4 of their 30 high school credits beginning in 2020 as e-learning courses. Is this something you saw on the radar, or did this announcement take you by surprise?
We had heard nothing about that. There had been no consultation with us by the minister or anybody in government, for that matter, about that. I think it's fair to say that the education world and beyond was flabbergasted when they heard that. There had been no preparation, and frankly, there's been no rationale to support the notion that every student will be required to earn 4 credits by e-learning. I can't begin to imagine any valid reason for pursuing that course.
Unless, of course, you're reading the economic efficiency narrative, and if the e-learning courses that will be required are controlled and delivered centrally, then you're not going to need as many teachers. And so that makes sense along those lines.
Well, in fact, they've talked about centralizing. They've talked about class sizes of 35 to 1 in e-learning. But, I'm going to quibble with you a bit, Stephen, about the use of the word efficiency. Efficiency means delivering the same thing at a lower price. Just cutting out good service and making it cheaper, that's not an efficiency. That's just cheaper, worse service. And we know that kids in general, there's only a proportion of them that are equipped to succeed in e-learning. Many more students start e-learning courses than succeed and complete them. And so that's, it may be cheaper, but I don't think it's fair to call it an efficiency.
Okay, so I will stand corrected on the efficiency, the use of the word efficiency. Man, you're really taking me to school today. I appreciate that. Harvey, at the outset, we indicated that on the day we're having this conversation, many students across the province are set to walk out in protest of the current actions and plans of the government. How is your organization supporting that move, and how are you responding to that show of support by students across the province?
So I'm going to start with the first part. What are we doing to support it? And let me be clear, nothing.
Okay.
These students didn't ask for our support. We haven't offered or provided any assistance to them in this. These are, pretty remarkable kids who from Ontario's school system who have recognized the threat to their own future and the future of those kids who are going to follow them into publicly funded education, and decided to take a stance. Good for them, I say. It's a show of civic engagement for which I think they can be rightly commended. And that's what I think it comes down to is, what are my thoughts about the march? How can you not be proud of the young people in a province who have taken a look at public policy announcements, analyzed those, digested them, recognized what they mean for themselves, and are taking action about it. I think it's commendable.
Well, it'll be very interesting to see what happens. And I know that OSSTF and other associations and unions across the province are preparing for Saturday. It's a rally from 12 to 2 on the lawn of Queen's Park, and it promises to be big. So what's the message you're preparing to give the government and to give citizens of Ontario? What do you want to communicate on Saturday?
Yeah, I mean, these kind of marches, they draw attention, and we will use that attention to, not marches, demonstrations, it's a rally. These sorts of things, because they draw attention, we can use that attention to talk about the threats to the system that are being proposed. So we'll talk about class sizes and the potential for ballooning class sizes. We'll talk about the loss of adults in the schools. So, 25% fewer teachers in schools, fewer curricular opportunities, obviously fewer extracurricular opportunities, which for so many students are the hook into school. They're not the most important thing in themselves, but when they get kids to come to school and stay there and like it, they have a significant value in terms of our ability as educators to help them succeed. We'll point to the e-learning proposal, which seems nothing but a cost-cutting attempt that every bit of evidence tells us will not be successful in terms of delivering credits to kids. So, we're at a time right now where Ontario's high school graduation rate has never been higher. We're into the mid-80s in terms of kids who graduate from high school. We're relative to the rest of the world, we have more students graduate from post-secondary than just about any other jurisdiction internationally. And so we want to point to the risks that are associated with a kind of thoughtless, knee-jerk cost-cutting exercise that this government is undertaking.
So, Harvey, although I've been retired for a few years myself, I live with a teacher who is out in schools every day and bringing all of this information and an increasing sense of anxiety home. And I think that there is that sense of anxiety and the sense that this dispute with the government is not going to end before there is work action of some sort, whether it's work to rule or a strike. And I know contract negotiations are not upon us quite yet, but there does seem to be a sense that moving into the summer that we're going to be carrying this anxiety with you. What are you communicating to your members, and what are you communicating to the public about that question of job action possibly in the fall?
Here's a couple of important things that I'm telling them. First of all, the government has set after making this announcement, they then set a consultation deadline of May the 31st. So if that's real, if they want to consult, I'm going to tell my members and the public, parents, students, anybody interested, anybody who understands the value of Ontario's high-quality graduates to Ontario's prosperity and civic life. I want them all to get in contact with their MPP. And, this government has some history already of reversing course when they've faced pressure. Let's do everything we can to have them reverse course. Let's make them find a way to stand down from the cuts they're proposing, and maybe we can head off some sort of conflict in the future. Beyond that, we have a round of bargaining that's going to begin in a few weeks. There's lots of time. There will be months before the expiry of collective agreements to talk with government representatives, to present a vision for what's good for Ontario's students and will allow them to be successful. Let's use that time to come to some agreement about an education system that actually works. And if we can do that, then we'll enter September peacefully, focused on what's truly important, which are the kids in classrooms all across the province.
Harvey, there are just a couple more points I wanted to pick up on, if I may. And one has to do with those conversations, those ongoing conversations that you're having with government officials. And we know that while the Premier and the Minister of Education are that front-facing policy voice that we hear, we know that behind the scenes, there are conversations, there are always conversations going on. And without revealing exactly what those are, can you pull back the curtain a little bit on that process to let us know about the communication that takes place? Well,
there should be those conversations. We, in the past, have had those conversations to an extensive degree. By no means did we agree with every direction that the past Liberal government, under either McGuinty or Wynne, pursued. We didn't agree with all of those directions. But we spoke regularly at the staff level, ministry to the staff in my office, at the elected level, me or my predecessors with the ministers of education. I met with and spoke with the previous Premier, Kathleen Wynne, on a number of occasions, and while we, didn't end up agreeing, we talked through a number of important matters. That isn't happening. We've made repeated efforts to reach out to the Minister of Education. She's granted me one whole 30-minute meeting back in October, and that seems to be the extent of her willingness to work with, somebody in my position, and the position is the representative of 70,000 education workers in Ontario. It's like they engage in deliberate union baiting, and it's cheap politics and it's not productive. I would be happy to have much more detailed, in-depth conversations, either elected official to elected official or staff to staff, and actually try to resolve some of these problems and allow us to provide input on what we see as productive contributions to the education system.
We've talked here and elsewhere about the issues, the cost cutting and the reduction of class size, that economic model, that economic utility model. And to a certain extent, Harvey, these are expected parts of a conservative narrative. They want to save the taxpayers' money. They run on those platforms. And so part of this is expected. But I really think also that we stand at a time where it's really, really important, perhaps more than ever, to dig deeper and to have those conversations and those debates about what it is in public education that we stand for and what it is that we will stand for. I'm wondering how your organization and other teacher organizations across the province can help us into those conversations so that they become more audible in the public square.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Stephen. And quite honestly, it's something that I have that I have tried to do. I mean, I've been doing, innumerable media appearances. I've been asked about comments by both the Premier and the Minister that I think are meant to goad me into some sort of a reaction to those. And over again, I've said, I'm not, it's not a conflict narrative. I'm interested in moving forward. Why don't we talk about what's good public policy? I've come back to that over and over. We will continue to do so. Even at the rally on Saturday, we will raise public policy issues. What's good education policy? We will find whatever venues we can to propose those. You may not have noticed, but I think we just put it out yesterday, a joint statement of unions in Ontario that represent educators of all kinds that proposes a set of principles that we will stand for. And they're around, creating inclusive schools, about promoting equity, about supporting kids with different needs, about supporting kids' mental health needs in school, making schools safe, investing in education. We're putting that out there, and I'm not at all interested in engaging in, the kind of mano a mano thing that I think the Premier would like to promote. I'd really want to talk about public policy.
Well, we would love to help you mobilize some of those conversations, and they're not one-offs. You can't just have the conversation and leave and go on to something else. These are you need to be in for the long haul on these deep philosophical and ideological and political, very political, because they involve policy conversations. Harvey, as a final question, if we were to take a commitment to those conversations seriously, if we were to open up that public space for debate and dialogue about what public education is in the 21st century in Ontario, what's at stake and what's in store? Why is this such an important time in our history?
I'm not being hyperbolic when I say it's the future of the province that's at stake. Because right now, I mean, we already have an excellent system, stacks up extremely well internationally, that prepares kids for the world into which they will be living and working. We have a system that graduates a high number of students, and we have a system that does a couple of other really important things in as much as it closes the gap for kids who come from different socioeconomic backgrounds. Ontario does remarkably well at that, and it closes the gap for new Canadians. Kids who are brand new to our system are very quickly up to speed and learning along with their peers. We continue to go down the road that the government is proposing, we're going to lose those things. We're going to lose the high-quality graduates that we currently turn out, and that's going to affect our civic life, and it's going to affect our economic prosperity. So, there's a reason we are as exercised as we are about this.
Well, Harvey, I know that traditionally we tend to look to our ministers of education for policy announcements and direction forward in terms of the education space. But in a couple of hours, the president of the Treasury Board here in Ontario is delivering an address to the Canadian Club. And I think I'm going to be tuned into that to perhaps get a better sense of what the next few months and couple of years are going to bring here in Ontario.
Mm-hmm. And a bit of a shame that that's the lens through which education is viewed instead of, the success of kids in our system.
Let's see if we can change some of that along the way. Harvey Bischof, president of the Ontario Secondary School Teachers Federation, thank you for being here, and thanks for sharing your insights and your passion.
Very much my pleasure, Stephen, and happy to talk again.
You've been listening to In Conversation with me, Stephen Hurley, on VoiceEd Radio. For more great content, be sure to visit voiceed.ca. There you'll find our latest blogs, podcasts, live broadcasts, and an ongoing invitation for you to become part of this growing, dynamic community of people who care about the conversations in education. Thanks for listening.